The heavy bronze doors of the National Security Tribunal didn't just open. They groaned under the weight of a decade of secrets. As I stepped onto the polished obsidian floor, my spine was a steel rod, my Class A uniform crisp enough to draw blood. I could feel my father's mocking smirk before I even saw him. That rich man's wheeze, he used to remind me I was just a glorified civil servant. My mother didn't even look up. She just smoothed her silk skirt with that familiar, disappointed sigh, as if my medals were nothing more than shiny toys. But then, the Chief Justice looked at the docket, looked at me, and his gavel slipped from his hand. "Commander Vane," he whispered, his voice trembling through the speakers. "The architect of Project Iron Citadel?" The room didn't just go quiet, it died. Behind me, my brother's arrogant startup smile vanished, and for the first time in my life, my parents realized they hadn't been belittling a daughter. They had been mocking the woman who held their favorite son's life in her hands. The air in the tribunal was filtered and recycled, smelling faintly of ozone and old, expensive paper. Every step I took echoed with a sharp, rhythmic precision that seemed to set the tempo for the room's anxiety. To anyone else, I was just another officer in a room full of suits, but I wasn't just there to observe. I was the storm they didn't see coming. In the third row, Alistair Vane, a man who measured worth in yachts and offshore accounts, leaned toward my mother, Meredith. I heard that thin, rattling laugh of his, a sound that had punctuated every one of my failures and dismissed every one of my achievements. Meredith just shook her head, her pearls catching the light as she looked at my uniform with the same distaste she'd have for a stain on a tablecloth. To them, I was the disappointment who chose a government salary over the family empire. I kept my eyes fixed on the seal above the bench, my heels clicking a steady beat of retribution against the marble. At the lead table, I placed my encrypted tablet down, the silver casing cold against my palm. I felt the room's energy shift as the bailiff called the session to order. Chief Justice Sterling entered, a man known for breaking the backs of the most powerful cartels in the country. He adjusted his spectacles, scanned the first page of the evidence, and then his entire posture collapsed. He stared at me, his eyes wide behind his lenses. "Commander Vane," he murmured, his voice cracking into the microphone. I was told the lead architect of the Iron Citadel would be joining us, but I never imagined. Behind me, the silence was absolute. My father's wheeze didn't just stop. It choked. Exactly 14 days ago, that same laugh had been the soundtrack to my humiliation. Sunday dinner at the Vane estate was a ritual of worship, and the deity at the head of the table was always my older brother, Dominic. He sat there, glowing with the radiance of a man who believed he was too smart to ever be caught, flashing a multi-million-dollar startup smile as he casually discussed his federal indictment. "Just a minor regulatory hurdle, Dad," he'd said, swirling a glass of vintage Bordeaux. "The Department of Commerce is just trying to flex. Wire fraud, export violations, it's all just paperwork nonsense." My father had beamed, his chest swelling with pride. "My boys' legal team will grind them into the dirt. They don't know who they're dealing with." Then, Dominic had turned to me, his eyes dancing with a cruel, effortless amusement. "Hey, Celine, since you're already hanging around the courthouse for your little desk job, maybe you can run some filings for us? Or at least grab the real lawyers some coffee while they do the heavy lifting?" They had laughed then, a warm, easy, collective sound that made the room feel smaller. I had simply smiled back, my expression a mask of polite, controlled military discipline, while deep inside, the gears of a much larger machine began to grind. I wasn't hurt. I was calculating. People think silence is just the absence of noise, but in the world of high-stakes intelligence, silence is a predator. My real office wasn't a cubicle in a beige building. It was a SCDF, a sensitive compartmented information facility, buried deep beneath the foundations of the Pentagon. It was a place of white noise generators and lead-lined walls, where the world's most dangerous digital secrets were kept under lock and key. That was where General Thorne had watched me present the final phase of Project Iron Citadel. "Good morning, General." I had begun, the blue light of the monitors reflecting in my eyes. "Subject is Dominic Vane." He didn't just commit fraud. He bypassed the tier, one encryption on the guidance systems for the Aegis-class destroyers. He routed the components through a shell company in Singapore, thinking he'd scrubbed the SWIFT identifiers. The general had gone rigid, his hand hovering over the kill switch for the operation. "This isn't just a white-collar crime, Commander," he'd said, his voice like gravel. "This is high treason. He's exposed every active pilot in the Pacific Theater." I hadn't blinked. "I know, sir. That's why I didn't just track him. I built the trap he's currently sitting in." The room had fallen into a heavy, tactical silence. It wasn't a moment of doubt. It was the quiet before the execution. When the briefing was over, I did something I had been trained never to do without absolute certainty. I stepped into the general's private office, stood at a perfect attention, and spoke with a clarity that left no room for interpretation. "Sir, for the record, I am formally recusing myself from the prosecution team for the United States versus Vane. I cannot lead the trial." General Thorne had looked at me for a long, searching minute before giving a single, sharp nod. "The right call, Commander. We need you on the stand, not at the table. Your testimony is the only thing that will make this stick." I had left that building feeling strangely hollow, yet filled with a cold, humming energy. I was being set aside again, just like at every dinner where Dominic was the star, but this time, the set aside was a strategic deployment. My brother's civilian lawyers, however, were too arrogant to see the difference. A week later, they filed a massive motion to dismiss, claiming the entire investigation was a personal vendetta fueled by my sibling rivalry. They called my work amateur. They called my evidence biased. They dared me to defend my honor in open court. The night before the trial, my mother called. Her voice was bright, airy, and utterly oblivious. "We're all coming tomorrow, Celine. We need to show the world that the Vane family stands together behind Dominic. I hope you'll be there to support your brother, even if your little job keeps you busy." I had simply replied, "I wouldn't miss it for the world, Mother." Then I hung up and opened my affidavit, 200 pages of cold, hard facts, digital fingerprints, and satellite intercepts. I spent the night highlighting every line they had dared to challenge, turning my testimony into a scalpel. On the stand the next day, the oath felt light, almost weightless in my hand. The real weight was sitting right behind me in the gallery. I could feel the heat of my father's gaze, the version of Dominic he still believed was a genius, and the sister he thought was a failure. Dominic's attorney rose with the grace of a shark, his $4,000 suit sharp enough to draw blood. "Your Honor," he began, his voice dripping with condescension, "this entire investigation was a mockery of justice." It was amateur hour led by an officer, Commander Celine Vane, who has a documented history of resentment toward her brother's success. "This is a personal bias masquerading as national security." Chief Justice Sterling didn't even look at the lawyer. He kept his eyes fixed on me, a look of profound respect bordering on awe. "Commander Vane didn't just lead the investigation," the justice said, his voice echoing through the chamber. "She authored the Iron Citadel Protocol. We teach her methods at every intelligence academy in the country." A silence fell over the room then, a thick, expectant, suffocating silence. I opened my binder, the leather creaking in the quiet. I didn't look at my family. I spoke the way I had been trained to speak in the heart of the Pentagon, precise, unshakable, and utterly lethal. I laid out the dates, the encrypted IP addresses, the exact routes of the illegal exports, and the precise statutes of the Espionage Act that my brother had trampled on. I detailed the moment he sat at Sunday dinner joking about coffee, while at that very second, his servers were pings against the Iron Citadel sensors. By the time I reached the shell accounts in Singapore, the color had drained from Dominic's face so completely he looked like a ghost. His startup smile was gone, replaced by a twitching, terrified mask of realization. My father sat frozen, his hand gripping the armrest of his chair so hard his knuckles were white. My mother's hands hovered at her throat, searching for her pearls, as if they could protect her from the truth. The illusion of the golden boy didn't just crack, it pulverized into dust. Cross-examination never happened. The high-priced attorney sat down slowly, his eyes fixed on the floor, defeated by the sheer, overwhelming weight of my amateur work. The Chief Justice's gavel struck the bench with a sound like a gunshot. Motion to dismiss denied. Bail revoked. The defendant is remanded into federal custody immediately. The sound of the marshals moving in was the only thing that broke the spell. The metallic click of the handcuffs was sharp, final, and far too loud in the silent room. Dominic looked at me as they led him away, his eyes wet and searching. He was looking for mercy for sister for a way out. I gave him nothing but a level, professional stare. I had been the coffee girl in his eyes, but in the eyes of the law, I was his judge and jury. Outside the tribunal, General Thorne was waiting by the black SUV. He gave me a single, silent nod, the highest praise a man of his rank could offer. Done, he said. Behind me, my parents didn't follow. They stayed in their seats, staring at the empty bench, as if I were a stranger they had just met for the first time. They had spent decades looking down on me, never realizing that the higher I climbed, the further they had to fall. I stepped into the cold afternoon sunlight, my uniform steady, my breathing perfectly even. For the first time in my life, the silence wasn't something used against me. It was mine. Weeks later, Dominic took a plea deal, 20 years in a maximum security facility. An email arrived from my father late one night. 2 words, proud. Sorry. I didn't delete it. I just archived it, unread, and let the silence continue. For more stories where the underestimated turn the tide, stay tuned to Vengeful Goddess. Together, we unveil the truth.